Okay. So we'll begin by just setting our motivation for coming together to study the Dharma. And generally speaking, there are three different kinds of motivation, all of which are interrelated. And the first is for those of us who are primarily interested in escaping the sufferings of this life. And for us, our Dharmakaya, what we take refuge in, the primary teachings for us are teachings on death and impermanence, the sufferings of the lower realms, taking refuge, heartfelt, sincere refuge, and the teachings on karma. And then for those of us who are primarily interested in creating a higher rebirth in our next life, then for us, our primary teachings, our Dharmakaya refuge is meditation on the sufferings of the higher realms, the general sufferings of samsara, and how to find liberation from samsara. And then lastly, for those of us whose main motivation is to find freedom from samsara, not just for ourselves, but for all sentient beings, then our Dharmakaya refuge is a cultivation of the mind of compassion, the mind of great compassion, the mind seeking to free all beings from suffering, the cultivation of this bodhicitta mind, and the primary practice that we learn about and train in are the six perfections. All right. So we're studying the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which is a mind training text. And Geshe Darge has been teaching this for quite some time. So for those of you who are just joining us, we are now on verse 43 or 42, depending on which translation you're using. And in the last class, we were talking about the suffering associated with losing friends due to chasing after high status. So fame, primarily fame. And in this next verse, we will be talking about the reason for treachery. Why does treachery happen in our lives? So each of these verses draws our attention to very specific ways in which our self-centered, ego grasping binds us to samsaric existence, right? So they hone in on very specific aspects of how our minds keep us trapped in samsara. And I think what's wonderful is the fact, that each verse really is so detailed and calls our attention to specific experiences. And so in doing so, it really helps us identify, the way in which self-grasping is so pervasive. And because it kind of gives us this emotional, jolt, right? It's kind of like an emotional slap in the face. Then that's the basis, for transformation. That helps us generate the desire and the motivation for change, right? So it's similar to, when you recognize that you have a sickness, based on the symptoms, then you'll do anything, to try to find a cure, right? And so the medicine of the Dharma is the medicine that helps us cure us of the three poisons, right? And the three poisons, that's sort of a shortcut way of referencing the negative emotions of attachment, hatred, and wrong view, or ignorance, self-grasping ignorance primarily, right? And so the medicine that we need to take is to first to recognize, that those are the causes of our suffering, or part of the causes of our suffering. And then to develop the mindfulness and introspection, right? Those tools, those aspects of mind that help us so that we can, in a sense, tame our minds, right? Have control over our emotions. And in that way, with mindfulness and introspection always present, then we can make good choices, right? We can practice morality on a moment by moment, action by action basis. And by understanding in a very deep sense, the way in which we are so trapped in samsara, right? This suffering of all pervasive suffering, excuse me, is what motivates us to make an effort to try to watch our minds, to try to be careful of our actions. So there's a beautiful quote from Chandrakirti's Advice on the Bodhisattva Path, which explains the importance of developing mindfulness or carefulness. He gives this example, and he says, a man had strayed from the main road and reached a desolate wilderness. He was convinced that he would die because he had not been careful about observing the signs of the road. And he was overcome and perished. Similarly, someone who is not concerned about the punishment of death, the Lord of the three realms, will be defeated by the Lord of death. For this reason, you must be aware of your mortal nature and always take care. So carefulness is the realm of the deathless, and carelessness is the realm of death. So, if we're careful, or if we're watching our minds, then absolutely, we can find freedom from birth, aging, and death. Right? We can go all the way to enlightenment, which is freedom from birth, aging, and death, right? And so in order to do this, we need to identify and to overcome this innate self-grasping ignorance. So, we can think of and identify that particular type of self-grasping in a very, very carefully, right? Because it's easy to misunderstand it. In fact, we're always misunderstanding it. So the correct way of apprehending the sense of I, right, is when we're going about our daily activities, right? If we're just sitting in a chair or listening, or we're walking somewhere, or maybe we're cooking something, or just kind of doing an ordinary activity, but without any strong sense of being present with the I, right? So the opposite would be when somebody, and this is what the Whale of Sharp Weapons is so good at pointing out, when somebody insults us, right? When somebody lies to us, when somebody physically, hits us, anything along those lines will provoke this strong sense of self, right? That sense of self just jumps out very, very clearly. And so that's the self-grasping ignorance that we're trying to identify and overcome, because from the that is the mistaken sense of I, the false sense of I, right? So the conventional I that's walking, sitting, talking, etc., is not what we're trying to overcome. Rather, it's that the false sense of I, which is provoked or identified most clearly when something negative, happens to us, right? So I just wanted to make that, point that out, right? So for example, it's not like just human beings experience that, right? Even animals do, right? So if you have, a dog and you try to take the dog's toy away, then immediately, by extension, the dog is going to think, hey, that's my toy. You're taking my toy. And so, anger will arise the same way. So the path to liberation, to free ourselves, is morality, right? Concentration and wisdom. Those are the three trainings: morality, concentration, and wisdom. So those are the practices that we seek to work with throughout our lives: morality, concentration, and wisdom. So Geshe Raften, in his book, The Essential Nectar, Meditations on the Buddhist Path, so he gives the analogy of these three as being like a field of barley, right? Tibet, right? Tibet, we always talk about barley in Tibet. So he says that in a field, we can sow barley seed, right? Barley seed planted in a beautiful field of beautiful, rich, fertile soil. And under those conditions, beautiful, tall barley plants will grow. And these produce more seeds of barley, right? So in the analogy, then the field is the practice of morality, right? You can't do anything without strong practice of morality. Forget about practicing Tantra, forget about really anything. If you don't have a very strong practice of morality, everything is just going to be very, very difficult. And the realizations and the transformation that you seek, not going to happen. Then the barley plant, the barley plants are the analogy for concentration, right? So if you have a strong, beautiful, fertile soil, then concentration, if you have morality, then concentration will arise very naturally. Because when you sit down, like in the formal sense, when you sit down to meditate, right, you're concentrating on whatever your object of meditation might be at that moment, right? If you're not always second guessing yourself and worrying about who's going to come knocking on the door because you've done something, right? When that parking ticket is going to arrive, in your inbox, whatever, your mind is completely free of all of that nonsense, then your concentration is going to be that much better. And then finally, the grain, the harvest then is wisdom, right? Because wisdom is the fruit of all of your efforts in morality and concentration. So the wisdom realizing emptiness. And so Geshe Raften says. So the grain, so in this case, the grain would be the grain from the practice of wisdom, right? So that grain can be ground and be made into delicious and satisfying bread, which can satisfy our hunger, right? So just in that way, then the wisdom of emptiness eliminates all of our suffering. So he interestingly points out 4 conditions which give rise to wrong actions. So these are, four things that will help bring so if we have all of these, mixed karmic seeds on our mental continuum, but these are particular conditions that can help those karmic seeds ripen into a negative action, into a misdeed. So can you think of what they might be? These are just kind of the common sense. In what conditions might you just go ahead and do something wrong? Okay, so I'll start it off. So the first is what's that?
Anila, I can give you one.
Okay.
It's Bree, and I was on my way there, and I got a flat tire.
Oh.
so the cause of the condition, I was on a narrow road. I hit a catch basin, and it projected me instead of really concentrating and then pulling the wheel a little bit to the left. It pulled me to the right, and now I have a flat tire. And I'm listening to you and waiting for my boyfriend to come.
Oh.
So, but there's that concentration. I've driven this road many times, and it just wasn't there for just a moment.
Oh, well, I hope you're going to be okay.
No, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, no, everything's fine. We're good.
Okay.
But it's a good lesson in concentration.
Lack of concentration. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
But you're not going to.
All right, I'm going to do that.
All right, hang in there then. Okay. So Bree is hanging in there on the side of the road with a flat tire. So the 4 ways, or the 4 triggers, or the 4 conditions that can give rise to a misdeed, so the first is ignorance. So it's not knowing what is right or wrong, right? You just don't know. And so you just do something, like a small child, a small baby might not know that it's not okay to, punch his sibling, for taking away his toy, right? So, you just engage in negative actions without any discrimination. The second one is strong defilements. So again, being overpowered, completely overpowered by hatred, by anger, right? And it's, the sense of being helplessly under the control of these negative emotions, that's the key point, right? And this is important, as we generate compassion for ourselves and for others, right? It's the sense that these negative emotions that have been with us for so long, right? They can just complete, like a tidal wave, just rise up and then pull you, back into the ocean, right? So it's very strong defilements. So even though we might know that, telling a lie or, stealing or whatever, we know that it's wrong, due to the force of these emotions, we just go ahead and do it, right? We're just helpless. Sometimes that happens. And then recklessness. Recklessness is, again, that something is bad, right? You can discriminate between good and bad, right? That again, another example from dog behavior. It's like, you put your ham sandwich on the counter, and the dog is there, and the dog knows, Mom told me don't grab food off the counter. I don't care. He just jumps up, grabs the ham sandwich and runs, right? Okay, so that's being reckless. That happens all the time. And partly it's like, oh, we think we can get away with it, right? You just don't care. You're not thinking about the karmic causes. Yeah.
I have a question, because karmic conditioning, sort of patterns that we develop in our mind stream,
Right.
does that contribute to that recklessness? So we're thinking why, and so that's part of the conditions and causes, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And so the more we rehearse these behaviors, the more we're likely to do it again. So yeah, and I think that's where the mindfulness and the introspection, are particularly important to identify the habits and to say, okay, I'm not going to do this again, right? Yeah. And then the fourth of the conditions, so they're kind of becoming more and more refined, right? Sophisticated, I guess, is the lack of respect for, it could be for the Dharma teachings, right? So knowing, hey, the Buddha taught me that what's a moral behavior, what's an immoral behavior. But I'm just, again, just going to go ahead and commit a non-virtue. Right? Even if I have to say, 100,000 Vajrasattva mantra recitations, I'm going to do it anyway. So lack of respect for the teachings, lack of respect for one's guru, lack of respect for beings in general, right? The person who you're harming. I just don't care about you. I'm just going to, etc. All right. So I thought that was kind of cool. Any comments or questions before we jump into verse 42?
Can you just go over the categories in the Eightfold Path that refer to morality, wisdom, and concentrations? So morality would be right action, right speech, and right livelihood. And right concentration would be right mindfulness and right meditation.
That sounds about right. Yeah, I don't know them. I can't recite them off the top of my head, but that sounds about right.
And wisdom would be right intent and right view.
Definitely right view.
Still one short.
Eightfold Noble Path. Anybody online? Concentration, the relationship between the Eightfold Noble Path and what we've been talking about so far. Morality, concentration, and wisdom. All right, that's our homework, to go back and delve into that relationship. That's a good question. Good question. Anything else? Yvonne?
You spoke about harming others, but some of these are also potentially harming themselves.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's not just, your actions are going to harm you, that harming yourself too, right? It's like two bodies, right?
Yeah. So in case you can't hear that, Yvonne's very thoughtful comment, she's pointing out that what we've been talking about so far in terms of harm relates both to harming others, but equally harming ourselves. And that comes up very clearly in this next verse, actually, when we talk about treachery, I think. Okay, so we're going to move on to verse 42. Which follows. All right, so let me go back to verse 41 just for a second, for those of you who maybe didn't hear 41, because I want to point out one thing. So 41 was, again, when I feel remorse, as soon as I sit down and reflect, it is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me for being shamelessly fickle and clamoring for high status. From now on, I will be vigilant in my association with others. So 42 then. Well, so here, so let me back up for 1 second again. Sorry. So we're talking about the 8 worldly dharmas, right? So the concerns that we have in this life, right? And so these are presented in terms of what we want and what we don't want. So those are, and again, this is a review for many of you, but they are pleasure and pain is the first pair. So pleasure, we want pleasure, we don't want pain, right? So pleasure and pain. The second is good or bad reputation. The third pair is praise and blame. And the last pair is gain and loss. So verse 41, which was about running and jumping after friends to try to obtain a good reputation, to find praised, to be praised and to get some kind of gain, right? That was verse 41, I think. And then as we move on to 42, 42 reads, when I am deceived by others' treachery, it is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me for being conceited and greedy. From now on, I will be discreet with respect to everything. So I'll read it again in case you don't have it. When I am deceived by others' treachery, it is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me for being conceited and greedy. From now on, I will be discreet with respect to everything. And then the alternate translation says, Tibetan is so hard that it's amazing. The difference in translations is just stunning. Unbelievable. So anyway, here's another translation. It says, when I am deceived by others' cunning, it is the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me for increasing my selfishness, pride, and insatiable greed. From now on, I shall markedly reduce all of them. So not too different, but we're using the word cunning instead of treachery, and spelling out, instead of just saying conceited and greedy, selfishness, pride, and insatiable greed, which is interesting. So here it says, from now, the main difference is here it says, Thupten Jinpa's translation says, from now on I will be discreet with respect to everything. And here in the Geshe Sopa's book, it says, from now on I shall markedly reduce all of them. So yeah, pretty much the same meaning, but just a little different. So I would think that treachery is like our betrayal of the betrayal of trust, right? We have trust in someone or something, and for whatever reason, due to karma ripening, right? That's the reason for karma ripening, then that trust is broken, right? And so that trust or treachery could occur in relation to any of these worldly dharmas, right? So we have trust in somebody that pleasure will arise. We have trust in something that, our reputation will be enhanced and will go up. We have trust that we'll receive, praise for doing a good job. We have trust that, we'll obtain, big bucks. And when something happens, to us, and when those conditions are reversed and the opposite happens, then of course, we're going to feel, we'll feel upset, right? So it's loss of any of these 4 attachments. So, the people who we consider our friends, our loved ones, sometimes, just out of the blue, it seems like they'll turn their backs on us in our time of need. We reach out for help to somebody who we've helped in the past, and they're not there for us. We think that somebody really likes us, maybe a coworker, and then we find out later that they've been, saying bad things about us behind our backs, right? That's a bad feeling. You're like, whoa. So my pro tip is to be very careful when you forward a long email chain, right? You find all kinds of things in those email chains. Like, oh, okay. Marital infidelity, right? That really hurts, happens all the time. Terrible. Someone you trust and, you've shared your deepest secrets, you find out later they've written a book about you, exposing all those secrets. Or you give, somebody something special and you find out, hoping that they would keep it and treasure it. And you find out instead, that they turned around and sold it on eBay or used it somehow for their own advancement. Okay, so here's my another funny dog example, and I apologize if you don't have a dog. But anyway, so I have this big dog. She's about the size of a lab, right? She's a lab Doberman mix. She's my rescue dog from Dawes. And so we had this, like this agreement, this trust that the dog could sleep on, my bed next to me, which was a small bed, right? And so basically, she has betrayed my trust by tricking me. So she'll jump up on the bed and then she sleeps right next to my pillow. And then, so to get her to move away, so I actually have some space, I'll give her a treat, right? So she moves grudgingly to the end of the bed, which is where the dog is supposed to sleep, right? Anybody who's got a dog, right? The dog sleeps at the end of the bed. And so she'll move. And then in the middle of the night, she's like, oh, either she has to go potty or, right? So I have to get up and let her out for potty because that's serious, right? But now she just sits there and she barks. And the minute I get up in the middle of the night, she jumps on the bed and goes sits on the pillow. Evil, purely evil. So that's a betrayal of trust. Okay. Then there's also institutional treachery, right? When we think of this in terms of like bigger things, not just dogs on beds, bigger things, we might feel that, we pay our taxes, we're good citizens, we obey all of those traffic signals, right? When we're driving and we come to a stop sign, right? We come to a full stop, not a rolling stop. We're good citizens. So we have the right to certain privileges. We have the right to certain government services, right? We have the right to justice. But sometimes it just feels like, the government lets us down. So one example is a gentleman who he's part of the FPMT for the Liberation Prison Project. Liberation Prison Project is associated with the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. I think I've mentioned this before, but so it's an opportunity to correspond with inmates, who are incarcerated, who are interested in studying the Dharma. So Chris has been in prison now for over 35 years for killing his father when he was like 19 years old. He was on drugs. His father was abusive to him. But anyway, he did kill his father. And despite his exemplary, behavior over the 35 years and completing the entire 14-module Discovering Buddhism course, and doing many, many, many other, amazingly good things. He's applied for a parole. I think he's been denied definitely more than 3 times, just over and over again. So you would think that, somebody who is really trying to make a difference and who really has experienced a transformation there would be some sense of, fairness that he would be allowed to be free. And yet, due to his deteriorating, health, he's come to the realization that, it's very possible he may just never get out. He may die in prison. So I think that, it's very natural for a sense of moral outrage, to arise when we experience, treachery ourselves, or when we see others, being the victim of what seems to be, treachery. And actually, interestingly, a writer, a New York Times journalist, Max Fisher, maybe you might have heard about this. There was a recent article on the New York Times about a book that he wrote. And this is interesting because he talks about how Facebook in particular has algorithms to send you posts that are intentionally aimed at generating a sense of outrage based on your own, views or whatever, right? So they'll feed you more information that's intentionally going to, arouse you, and it's intentionally polarizing. Okay, so I don't think it's a huge surprise, but it's something to be cognizant of. He talked about the violence in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, and he shares his analysis of how those particular countries experienced conflict as a result specifically of Facebook, WhatsApp, and YouTube fomenting, genocidal hate. So he shows how the disinformation that was fed to people, false accusations, against minorities, etc., led to direct action, on the ground. Right? It wasn't just people, reading the Facebook posts over breakfast. It was people, actually acting on the nonsense and on the lies that they were being fed. And I think we saw that, here in America too, with what went on with the elections, right? So definitely have to be cognizant and careful with what we're being exposed to, what we're being fed. So going back to the verse, then I was kind of trying to explore what treachery means. So I'll read it one more time. When I'm deceived by others' treachery, it's the weapon of evil karma turning upon me for being conceited and greedy. From now on, I will be discreet with respect to everything. So let's go back to this idea of conceited and greedy. What's the relationship then between being conceited and greedy, or hungry, and experiencing treachery? So I was thinking that so we're talking about the karma here, right? And if you remember the 8 verses of mind training, or the 8 verses of thought transformation, then one of the verses says, when someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have great hopes gives me terrible harm, I shall regard that person as my holy guru. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell. When we put our trust in somebody, we've helped them, we've done everything, possible to benefit this person. And then, instead of being rewarded or getting what we expect to get from that relationship, instead that person treats us with terrible harm, with disrespect, in the worst possible ways, right? So instead of getting angry, right, which would be like the first reaction of like, what, getting angry, instead, we should consider that person as our teacher, as our most precious guru, right? That's our karma coming back and ripening on us, right? So that's why we're experiencing the harm from that person. And so by having that person's almost just like a medium or a means for that karma to express itself, right? And so in recognizing what's really going on, what the underlying process is for the arising of that suffering, then we have to think of the person who harmed us as actually benefiting us, right? That's our teacher. We're not going to be able to grow unless somebody challenges us. Elizabeth?
Agreed. I just think there's a huge space in between of when that happens and when you can like come to that, okay, right, I'm learning from this.
It's hard.
Because like you described earlier, there's first that initial tidal wave of whether it can be anger, it can be also sadness, it can be disappointment, it can be all sorts of things, right? And so
it's a mixture.
What helps me with my practice is going when that is happening, besides getting knocked out and wiped out from the tidal wave, okay, so how do I get back up? And you're right, being able to come to that place of there's a lot for me to look at, and I can learn from this situation, and so therefore I'm grateful.
Right.
But I do a dance sometimes and go back and forth just a little bit, so
Absolutely.
grateful, but
It's really hard.
and then,
Yeah.
and then, but I am overall, and that's where my practice comes in. And you see people who get stuck, and I don't want to be one of those people who get stuck because I think that just stops me from growing.
Absolutely.
So, but it's really, really hard. And you mentioned Chris and the institution, but the institutions that find the people that we have a very punishing mindset.
Yes.
Penal system. So, until that shifts, the miracle anybody gets it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really
Very
hard.
unforgiving.
Yeah.
It is
But
hard.
if you come to the other side, I know I've had benefits.
Not immediately.
It's
Slowly.
I can guarantee, and there's very few times I like to say the word never, it's never immediate. There's always, it's just a pause, there's that,
Right.
oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me, wait a minute,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah. Well, and then also thinking that, the karma, once it ripens, once it's been experienced, it's not going to happen again.
Right.
So we really have to really convince, we have to convince ourselves that that's true. It's not going to happen
It's
again.
happening a second time?
No, like Bree with the flat tire. You're not going to get that flat tire karma.
So if it's possible to separate yourself from a situation or a relationship like that, let's say there's a person who continuously causes you emotional harm without meaning to, not like an abusive relationship, just someone that you, for some reason, don't get along with, right? So you have relationship in life, but there's continual frustration.
Somebody who's
If you're
annoying.
able to never see that person again, to literally separate, like it's not a big deal. Your relationship isn't like that, where you could just say, I'm not going to go to that thing anymore and see that person. Is that recommended for peace of mind, or are we talking about continuing the relationship for the sake of practice? this.
There you go.
Well, it's just gonna be replaced by someone else. No, I mean, if
All right.
if your karma is to
There you
the
go.
seat of people you trust, I would assume that it won't matter who that person is.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering
it's a
what
good point.
your advice would be, or what another.
No, I think you're right. You know, that's exactly the right attitude.
Which
And
is,
it's up to how you feel, you know, like if you feel that if you can keep the relationship in that perspective, thinking that, wow, you know, I could just walk away from this, but maybe it's an opportunity for my practice to grow. And I feel like, you know, it's not so antagonistic that I'm going to be, you know, I can handle this. It's kind of like sparring with somebody, right? I'm going to keep, I'm going to grow because I can, this is somebody who's sort of an equal level, maybe. And then you work with them, you get to a certain level in your practice. And then you think, maybe you even think, gee, I need somebody who's a little bit a tougher opponent so that my skills get that much better, right? And let me say just one thing. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is known for surrounding himself with people who are challenging and downright annoying because, you know, for their benefit and then perhaps also a little bit for himself, you know, just to keep growing. If you know, you can see that in any type of training, right? Whether it's music or math or whatever it is, you know, you need to have that challenge to be able to make any progress. I think that's true. So and just one last thing, if you know, when we sit down to do our prayers, right, who do we surround as we generate, you know, our merit field and everything, right? You put those who you love, who are close to us, right? They're there. But then we have all the big ocean of like neutral people. It's like 99% of the population, right? We got them in there. And then we really try very hard to think of those super annoying people, our downright enemies. We have to include those are like first and foremost, right? So you really do need them. Otherwise, you know, you sit there and sometimes if you're too isolated, you know, like you don't go out too much. The only people you're hanging out with are like dogs like me. Then when you sit down to try to think of somebody who's a good enemy, it's not that easy. So be happy you got annoying people in your life. Okay, Yvonne.
So here's my challenge with this aspect,
Mhm.
is I bear witness to people.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I know first is for them to be safe. That's really important process, and then, you know, finding some kind of meaningful outcome. But I think that has to be, those 3 stages have to be there. I think. I mean,
Safety first.
Safety first.
Yes,
because,
yes,
you
yes.
know, some of these pretty emotionally, verbally harming you outright.
Get out. Number one, get out.
And I don't.
I
know if
totally
that
agree.
aligns with the Dharma, but that's certainly.
No. I think that's absolutely the right approach. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, and it's particularly whether, you know, you're somebody with a strong Dharma practice or not, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know, first, give me some space. I don't want to be, you know, lose my life. Just, you're not going to be able to practice. I would consider that, you know, like wise selfishness. Wise selfishness says, put yourself in a safe space so that you can continue to practice, right? Yeah. Elizabeth?
Well, we talk about, you know, doing the harms to others. We also have to include ourselves in that. And I know in our culture we have done that.
Absolutely.
We're not supposed to be doing harm. There's a big difference between having to practice and learning from others versus exposing yourself to somebody who is emotional any sort of, you know,
Mhm.
I think there's a real difference between those two,
Mhm.
and we have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Leave the mask on first, on ourselves before we can, you know, be healthy and engage with the rest of the
Absolutely.
world.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think unless you are like a really, really high level bodhisattva or something. Yeah, but even so, I don't think that's right. I mean, giving yourself being the target of abuse, that's not going to help anybody else progress. Instead, you're just helping them commit misdeeds. So yeah, no. hit the delete button. Okay. Anything else? Oh, one more quote. Wait, I'm gonna go on with my quotes here. All right, so along the same lines, right? Should even, this is from the Lama Tripa, the puja, the practice. Oh, wait. Okay, sorry, I forgot to check the comments. Okay, let me read this one verse and then I will go back. From the Lama Tripa, Guru Puja, everybody knows this quote. Should even the myriad beings of the three realms without exception become angry at me, humiliate, criticize, threaten, or even kill me, I seek your blessings to complete the perfection of patience, not to be distraught, but to work for their benefit in response to their harm. Okay. So that's sort of related to treachery. So that's the advice, the training. And so, again, none of these occurrences are a surprise when we think of karma, cause and effect. Right? So anything that's happening to us is a result of actions, negative actions, and positive actions that we have done in the past. Okay, so let me go back here to see what this is. Okay, that sounded like a personal. So, so in general, whenever our relationships with others are difficult, then and we think of people in this life who we dislike. If there's anybody who you dislike or find somewhat annoying, then being able to generate genuine compassion for those individuals, sometimes it seems impossible, right? It's just like, I can't do it, and you're ready to just walk out and shut the door, slam the door. So how can we develop a sense of great compassion for these people, wanting for them to be free from suffering? Even though they've hurt us, they've hurt our loved ones, they've hurt our community, they've hurt our country. And so focusing on equanimity, really meditating on equanimity is the essence, of this transformation that we seek. So we really need to think over and over again from the long-term perspective, not just from the point of view of today or what happened, yesterday, or very short term, right, in a relationship with a day-to-day relationship with somebody. But again, from the Buddhist perspective, taking that long-term view, over the course of multiple lifetimes, perhaps, if we can do that. It's to show that our relationships are all interconnected, and so there are many examples of how that's played out. But we can just think that somebody who is our enemy today was most definitely, when you think in that term, lifetimes upon lifetimes. And even sometimes in the course of one lifetime, right? We've had, I think, experiences. I know I have, where somebody who I now consider a friend was at one point in my life, not so friendly. But things change, right? The point being that everything is impermanent, that friends become enemies, enemies become friends, etc. We can think of relationships in terms of how, somebody who is your mother, who in this life, maybe at one point, we were their mothers. That didn't come out quite right, but you know what I mean, right? There was a role reversal there. All right. So that's really worth spending a lot of time thinking about, think about equanimity over and over and over again. And then slowly, the mind will change. So as long as we're controlled by this self-grasping ignorance, though, then, you know, we're naturally related to that. Anger and attachment will arise, right? Because we're protecting and we're thinking of me, myself, and I, due to this ignorance. And so that's the cause for all of the infinite types of suffering. So the greatest treachery, in a sense, is the acts of unkindness, the harm that the betrayal of trust towards that we have towards ourselves, that we experience, that we direct towards ourselves, right? That's I think a form of treachery. So we're, in a sense, we're, you know, like we're betrayed by our own inner demons, right? By these strong negative emotions. They betray us by trapping us in samsara, right? And so we're so blinded by these emotions, we're so blinded by our ignorance, we're so poisoned, our minds are so poisoned that we are unable, or it's very difficult for us to see the possibility of liberation. You know, or even at the physical level, you know, if sometimes if you have some kind of, you know, find out the doctor tells you you have like a chronic illness or something, you know, you kind of feel like you're betrayed by your own body, right? Or if you have an autoimmune disease, right? You're betrayed by your very own body. And you look at yourself, you're like, what? You know, where did that come from? All this time, you know, I've had this, maybe the seeds of whatever, you know, maybe I've got cancer now. I don't know I have cancer, but I could have cancer, right? So you feel like betrayed. I've taken good care of my body. I've eaten good food, right? I cut down on the sugar, the salt, the caffeine. What? You still end up with a disease. All right. And so when we think of all of that, then we give rise to compassion. Compassion, you know, just for, not just for ourselves, but compassion for all beings, right? Unbelievable, how awful, how everybody is stuck in the same boat. Trapped by, you know, the karma, trapped by negative emotions and ignorance. So any questions or comments? David?
I have a question about wrong view, right view, as it pertains then to treachery. And I'm wondering if there is wisdom, or I should say, what is your comment on the wisdom of being able to, or the absolute mandate to separate the sin from the sinner, so that if we want to enhance our compassion for a person who has practiced treachery or betrayal against us, my sense is that it may be easier to feel compassion for that person if we can give ourselves permission to disdain the action.
Yes.
So in that sense, right? So it's hate the sin, love the sinner.
Absolutely.
Right? So is that
Right.
that part of this too? So I don't want to misunderstand that when a wrong has been done to us, there is no expectation that we turn the other cheek about the act itself,
Right.
but we move forward towards the person who has
Exactly.
done this, because then they become our guru or teacher in that moment.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No. And so does anybody else want to respond to that? And I'm sorry if you guys online, I hope you can hear the discussion. The questions are very detailed and it's hard for me to like summarize it in a nutshell. Anybody want to respond to that before? I don't want to like always respond first. So that's just right.
It's Ani.
Louisa?
Hi. It's not a question, but if the person speaks very softly, it would actually be kind of helpful to just get a quick little
Okay.
thanks.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to
Thank
mute
you.
myself. Okay.
Okay. So David was pointing out that when something happens, whether it's to us or to somebody else, then we need to be able to distinguish the harm from the harmer, right? So the action itself is what we are holding as negative, right? So whether it's lying, cheating, stealing, or whatever, that is the actual thing that we need to target. Not we're distinguishing the harmer from the harm that he or she caused, right? And so by being able, in this context, right, so being able to think of karma as being an underlying cause for somebody to create harm, being able to go back to that thinking of how we're overwhelmed by negative emotions, right? Then all of those are reasons for why somebody might helplessly, we talked about the 4 conditions, helplessly act in a way that's destructive, right? And so compassion arises then from the awareness, those are the forces, the conditions that are in play, and realizing that the person who caused harm was so that's pretty much it. So that's where the compassion arises. Not holding people not responsible, despite that, so we're saying, okay, karmic conditions overpower us, negative, not having control of our minds overpowers us, so you're still responsible, we're still responsible for our actions nonetheless, right? But the compassion arises because those forces are so strong, right? So we have, whether it's we ourselves have committed a non-virtue, a misdeed, or if it's somebody else, then we have compassion in both cases.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other comments?
Hi, Annie. I just,
Hi,
as
Karen.
long as, hi. So as long as we're clear when we're talking about this for women and other people who are in abusive situations, that you can make yourself safe and have that compassion for the person from a distance. I think that's my understanding of.
Yeah, I think that's definitely that's the first step, is to be safe, keep yourself out of harm's way, and then continue to practice. Somebody once said, somebody asked, I can't remember the context, but somebody asked one of the high lamas, if somebody's pointing a gun at you, what should you do? I think it was Khenpo Rinpoche. If somebody pointed a gun at you, should you just stand there and generate compassion? And he just laughed and he said, no, run. I think this is, like it's a little similar.
I remember, Ani,
Uh-huh.
I remember ages ago asking Jumpa a very similar question. And he said, it's okay to move away from a person that's, this is not a life and death thing. And he said, it's okay to move away. He said, just do it without angry. And I love that so much. And I never forgot it.
There you go. That's a good point. Yeah, so you do it without anger. Yeah, without hatred, without no, that's excellent. Thank you. All right. wise selfishness. Okay, so so what I thought we would do, and a couple of other ideas here, but to do a little meditation, again, going back to the general sufferings of samsara, thinking about impermanence, because I think once we're really, really convinced that we need to devote more time and energy into escaping from samsara, then the true sense of renunciation arises. And so let's do that for a little while. Hope that would be helpful. So if we could, this is more like an analytical meditation. So Khensa Rinpoche's book, his commentary on the first Panchen Lama's secret instructions has been published as The Easy Path. So it's the same book that I used in the last class. And he goes through the general sufferings of samsara, which is something that we can all relate to. So I thought I would just read them point by point. All right, so we'll try to do this in a meditative frame of mind. So just sit comfortably and think that, we're going to review the general sufferings of samsara with the aim, the goal of finding liberation, right? Understanding the symptoms of the disease. So the first of the 6 general sufferings is there's no certainty regarding who will help and who will harm you. That's what we were just talking about. Everything is always changing. Even in one lifetime, friends can become hateful enemies, and bitter enemies can become close friends. Likewise, with our wealth, just in one lifetime, we can go from being very poor to very wealthy, and then back to poor again. So there's nothing in samsara that we can truly rely on. The root verse says, no matter how much I enjoy samsaric happiness, I'll never reach a point of satisfaction. Not only that, having increased my attachment, I'll bring forth many unbearable sufferings. And the second suffering is that your desire for happiness can never be satisfied. Oh, actually, that goes with the verse that I just read. Sorry. The second suffering is that your desire for happiness will never be satisfied. Instead of bringing lasting satisfaction, samsaric happiness simply leads to more and more attachment. This suffering of never being satisfied is the worst of sufferings. We endlessly and slavishly follow our endless, limitless desires, hoping to find satisfaction. The antidote is the practice of contentment. Contentment is the supreme wealth. Nagarjuna said, If you're content, then you're wealthy. If you're not content, then you're not wealthy. And then the root text continues. No matter how good the bodies are that I obtain, I must relinquish them again and again. Thus, I can draw no assurance from having obtained a body. I have taken conception repeatedly since beginningless time, and thus there is no perceptible limit to birth. And no matter how many samsaric marvels I attain, I must lose them in the end. Therefore, I can have no confidence in obtaining marvels. Marvels of samsara. That's like a big house and a fancy car. I can have no confidence in my companions because I must go beyond this world alone and companionless. Therefore, now that I have obtained this life of freedoms and opportunities, which is so difficult to find and once found so valuable, I will attain in whatever way possible the precious highest state of a Buddha, in which I have abandoned all the misery of samsara. Guru deity, please bless me to be able to do that. Okay, so renunciation arises very naturally from meditation on suffering, right? And we think how tired we are of spending all of our energy just trying to satisfy. It's kind of like having that inner voice, right? It's like having like a big baby that we're always exhausting ourselves to try to keep, like your Her Royal Highness happy, right? Like the little princess mind. It's that self-cherishing, trying to always keep, is it a little bit too hot, Your Majesty? Is it a little bit too cold, Your Majesty? Whatever it is, are you a little bit too hungry? Blah, blah, blah. Always, moment to moment, trying to keep that little princess happy, or the little prince. And so, Chris we exchanged letters, and in his most recent letter, he wrote this. He's really my teacher. There's no question about it. I'm supposed to be his Dharma teacher. He's definitely mine. And he writes, pride is one of the 6 rudimentary afflictions. This conceited attitude is like a balloon. You're all puffed up, but completely empty inside. The antidote is to realize that you're still completely enmeshed in the web of cyclic existence and samsara. And this is nobody's fault but your own. You created this karma. Humility. That's what he wrote. So it's a determination to be free, right? It's the definite decision. This is what renunciation is. It's the definite decision to be free of samsara and to gain liberation based on the total conviction that a true stopping, a true cessation of suffering is possible, and that a true pathway of mind, the true path, right? Think of the Four Noble Truths, will bring that stopping about, and with which one is willing to give up true suffering and its causes. All right. I'm going to close just quickly with random acts of kindness, right? Random acts of kindness. Liberation from suffering through random acts of kindness. So there's an article in the New York Times, September 2nd, that talks about some research that's been going on. The findings were published in August that have proved that random acts of kindness make people happy, make the person who's engaged in the random act of kindness happy, as well as the recipient. So the question is, how come we don't engage in more random acts of kindness? And so researchers have found that we tend to not do as many random acts of kindness as one might think we would, because we underestimate the impact, the value, the significance that random acts of kindness might have on other people. So we don't think it's worth making the effort because the other person's not going to care that much. That's our general thinking, right? And one of the people who was interviewed for this article is Dr. Tara Kusino, the clinical psychologist and meditation teacher. She said, I find that kindness can be a really hard sell. She wrote a book, The Kindness Cure. People desire kindness. They often feel inconvenienced by the thought of being kind. She also says that stress, can be a factor that prevents us from being kind, as well as the little judgy voice, in people's heads that cause them to question whether or not their gesture or gift will be misinterpreted, or whether, somebody might, like if you give something to somebody and you think, maybe I shouldn't do it because maybe they'll feel like they have to give me something back, right? So you don't do it. I think I do that all the time, in addition to just being cheap. Okay, so when she wrote that when the kindness impulse arises, we tend to just overthink it. You know, you just get stuck in that little, should I do it? Should I not do it? And then we don't do it. So the moral of the article, I think, was, you know, just to do it, and kindness inspires more kindness, right? Smiles go around. And both the receiver and the giver definitely are happier. So along those lines, here's the opportunity. This is not a request. It's an opportunity to engage in a random act of kindness, which is not so random. But I need to respond to Chris's latest letter. And I was thinking, what could I do for him that would make him feel valued and less lonely, right? Prison's a lonely place, let's face it. So I brought some paper and pens. If you feel like it, maybe just write them, just even sign your name and say something, whatever you want. You don't have to do this, but I'll pass these around. And if you want to do this, you can. And I will put my email here in the chat box for anybody who wants to send me an email to, his name is Chris, and just say something, whatever you want to say, something kind would be wonderful. Thank you, Bree. Okay, so any questions, comments, experiences that you would like to share? All right.
A question about the text, like historically. Is this meant to be read literally, the connections between the action and the karma that returns, or metaphorically? And if it's literal, is there a way that you can explain how an enlightened being could be aware of these direct connections and transmit them to us? In other words, this is the skeptic in me asking, how do they know? I'm not saying I'm totally cynical about it, but I'm also, this is where I struggle to grasp
How karma works.
Karma, yes. I struggle to grasp all of the parts of Buddhist education and practice that are based in reincarnation.
Right.
Not because I don't believe in it, but because I have not believed in it. And it's very new to me to even give it a chance. So I wonder how you would, I mean, if we're in a social gathering and I asked you, how do they know? How is it that it's my karma for being arrogant that I'm receiving bad actions from trusted friends? Like, that's a very direct.
Right.
And every
Very
person
specific.
is very particular. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. How do they, how are these connections put together?
Okay.
If it's explainable.
So Eric raised the question of how do we know how karma works? You know, how does a specific cause give rise to a specific effect? How can we validate, you know, that as a type of knowledge, valid knowledge? I think that's the question. And then along the same lines, the question is, what about past and I guess future lives, right? How do we understand rebirth? Anybody else want to take, Yvonne, would you like to comment on that?
Well, there was a really good podcast out of the London General Center on past lives and what is it, sudden death syndrome? Sudden death. Past people have near-death experiences. And so there's a Dutch physician who's done a lot of research on this, and there was this wonderful teaching with Geshe Namba. And he talks specifically about this and some of people's experiences. I have listened to a number of my patients talk about near-death experiences, most of whom are pretty good, but one person in particular, who's pretty helpful in this person's life. There are challenges in this person's life. So I don't know if that's enough to, you know, hold on to for you, but it might be a launching point. What's the name again? I found that in the past, but I don't remember his name. He's a Dutch physician, but Geshe Namdak out of the London Center. London Center, they have this wisdom teaching that they have a podcast on. So again, I don't know if that's helpful or sufficient, but
That's a good research.
that has a department too, or that, and it's been so long since I read about it, so I don't.
There are a lot of research has been done. Somebody Richardson,
Early memories
Yeah.
and things like that.
well, and he documented, I think it's the University of Virginia, right? The,
Somewhere around there.
somewhere in that part of the country,
Somewhere in there.
documented many, like, how many volumes were in this research? I don't remember, but the experiences of particular people who remembered their past lives, particularly, you know, I think it's more common for children to remember their past lives in some detail. So that's one aspect of it. And then in terms of, you know, karma, the particular causes and effects, then I think, you know, this goes back to the whole question of the validity of the Buddha's teachings and how much, you know, we can accept. And usually, you know, the way we think of that is just that there are many things that we can directly experience and think of as making sense of being in harmony or with our own life experiences. And so if the Buddha, you know, was right in all of those aspects, then for these more hidden aspects, you know, of the teachings, the more deep, the ones that are more difficult to wrap our minds around, then likewise, you know, there's a certain level of trust that he must have been right in those two.
Did the author of The Wheel of Sharp Weapons profess to have witnessed these connections in their meditation or in a state of enlightenment where they could?
That's a good question.
I mean, there has to have written this, there has to have been an observation of the connections.
Mhm,
Someone had
mhm.
to have seen either metaphysically or on earth
Experientially, yeah.
this connection and noticed it and said, I'm gonna write this stuff down. Otherwise, it seems to me, and not that this is negative in any way, that it seems more metaphorical where it's good to draw connections between, that it helps us as humans because
Sure.
of how our brain works. If we just say, don't do anything bad and nothing bad will happen to you, is it just a really smart guru putting it in words that we can understand? Whether or not there is a direct connection is unimportant, because if you take it as a whole, it helps you understand your every action.
Yeah, the result is the same.
I mean, if there had, I would assume there's
Yeah.
an historical answer to that. It's almost like, no, so-and-so, this is the enlightened being who saw it.
You have to go back and ask him.
Take it on faith. I can understand that.
You gotta ask him. But I mean, I think it's based on other teachings, right? I mean, the karmic cause and effect relationships that he's going through, I think were based on, like, you can find the source would be, you can find it on the Long Rim, you can find other texts that would also spell these out, right? So I think what he's done is, the author has done is to, and it becomes more clear as you go through the rest of the text, you know, how brilliant this really is. But it's a whole, you know, presentation that's generated to inspire us to change, right? By thinking through each and every action, wanting to make sure that we don't end up experiencing the result,
Yeah.
the suffering result. So that's not, I'm not answering your question
I
very
don't know if there's an
directly.
answer. That's
but
what I don't know.
That's a good
If
point.
there's like a point in time where someone's like, I have witnessed these connections and now I'm telling you, or.
Well, I think some of the karmic connections make sense, right? Like from a day-to-day level, you know, they kind of, you're like, yeah, I think that I've experienced
Well,
that.
in our mind, the way our minds work, I can see it. But Geshe has told us that it's almost impossible to know what karma is attached to. So if something negative happens, you can say, yes, I brought that on myself, but it's almost impossible to say what.
Specific acts. No,
Yeah,
that's
what
true.
did I do
Only the Buddha
9,000
knows. Yeah.
years ago that brought
Yeah,
this
yeah,
on?
yeah.
But someone knows.
Well, the Buddha in his
Well,
omniscience would be able to point to a specific individual's life experiences and say, oh, 9,999 lives ago, he did this. But like you said, it's in the broad scheme of things.
But that's a valid answer. You're saying.
The Buddha
Buddhist
does, yeah.
omniscience helped a highly achieved, enlightened human to pass this information on. I mean, that's,
Yeah. Anything else, Bree?
I missed a little bit of the teaching because who's Chris?
Oh, Chris is the inmate, who's somebody who's been incarcerated in a California prison for a number of years.
And you have been receiving letters.
Yeah, through the Liberation Prison Project.
Oh.
Yeah, that's Chris. Yeah. Oh, somebody has shared. It's Ian Stevenson. Yes, thank you. He is the researcher who put together the studies on rebirth. Ian Stevenson. And so he passed away, but I think some of his students have carried on. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there was a book that came out recently specifically about this topic. I'll have to get the name. All right, so we're over time. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'll put my email address in the chat here if you want to send a little note to Chris. Greatly appreciated. He is an amazing Dharma student. Just amazing. Okay, thank you very much. We dedicate the merit from today's class to our own spiritual progress and to being able to benefit and to benefit all sentient beings.
Thank you,
All
Anya.
right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.